A police officer slashed the tires of his car, laughing that he didn't belong here. But he didn't know who he was up against. How Carter responded shocked even the most experienced. But let's start from the beginning. It was a hot summer morning, mist rising from the road as the first pedestrians began to stir in the city. Carter Brooks, the mayor, was driving calmly in his expensive suit and dark sunglasses, behind the wheel of his black BMW, invisible to most. This was his usual route to City Hall, but something felt off today. He sensed a tension in the air that was hard to ignore. Maybe it was just his intuition, or maybe he was noticing the strange looks from passers-by more often. Either way, his heart rate quickened, and although he usually kept his composure, today he felt something was wrong. As he drove along the familiar road, his attention was drawn to a police car parked by the roadside. At first glance, it seemed like a routine operation. The car wasn't parked in a no-parking zone, yet Carter felt that this wasn't just a random patrol. He was the mayor of this city, a man of influence and power, and over the years he'd learned to sense when something was off. Suddenly, the officer spotted Carter's car and immediately stepped out of the patrol vehicle. He approached with an urgency, as if determined to do something important. Despite the fact that Carter was in an expensive car and dressed sharply, the officer shot back at his glance. "What are you doing here? You shouldn't be in this neighborhood." His voice was rough, with no hint of respect, and his eyes held clear disdain. Carter was taken aback. Such treatment was completely new to him, given his status. Without answering Carter's questions, the officer pulled out a knife and began slashing the tires of his BMW. Carter was in shock. In that moment, he felt vulnerable and helpless, but at the same time, a thought ran through his mind. This moment needed to be documented. He quickly pulled out his phone and began recording. There was no fear on his face, just confusion and anger bubbling inside him. "You don't even know who I am," he said calmly, but with a clear threat in his voice, hoping to make the officer think twice. The officer ignored his words and continued cutting the next tire. "I know who you are. You're the mayor. So what?" he sneered as he began slashing another tire. Carter felt the tension inside him tighten. He couldn't believe this was happening to him, but at the same time, he realized that this was about more than just personal humiliation. This was an act of systemic racism, aimed not just at him as an individual, but at everything he represented. Carter continued recording the incident. He knew that he had to use this moment, not just to deal with the officer, but to expose how deeply racism was embedded in the system, even among ordinary patrol officers. When the officer realized Carter was recording, he grew visibly agitated. "Why are you filming this? Who the hell do you think you are?" he spat, trying to cover up his actions. But it was too late. Carter knew that if he let this go without holding the officer accountable, nothing would change. He couldn't let this man get away with it. And despite his power, even the mayor of the city became just another black man seen as a threat. Systemic racism showed its true face once again. The situation escalated rapidly. Carter stood there, still holding his phone, realizing that his life had just been irrevocably changed. The officer looked at him with a mocking sneer, feeling completely in control of the moment. "You don't belong here, boy," he repeated with contempt. Carter, however, kept his dignity and maintained eye contact, refusing to show weakness. As the officer continued to threaten him, Carter felt a deep rage rising within him. He suddenly realized that the man before him was just a part of a much bigger issue. This wasn't a personal conflict with a police officer. It was a confrontation with a system that allowed people like him to behave however they pleased. He couldn't let this moment pass without consequence. Carter calmly but firmly said, "You don't know who I am. I'm the mayor of this city, and soon you'll find out who's breaking the law here." The officer just smirked and responded, "Mayor? Seriously? You think you're above everyone? Just forget it." He tried to cut another tire, hoping Carter would just leave, but Carter wasn't backing down. Feeling the growing tension, Carter took a step forward. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about you. You're part of a problem I've been trying to fight for a long time. You're not feared because your system isn't a system of justice. The officer opened his mouth, but before he could speak, his expression changed when Carter pulled out his phone again, showing the live recording of the incident. At that moment, the officer's confidence shattered. The situation was going public. Consequences were looming. The officer, now flustered and confused, began to fumble. Carter felt his control over the situation growing. He tucked the phone back in his pocket, because now his actions weren't just about documenting his humiliation. This was a battle for justice. He knew this moment was crucial, not only for the city, but possibly for the entire country. Carter made a call to the local newspaper. "I just witnessed police misconduct," he said. Carter understood that this wasn't just his chance to expose the truth, but it was also an opportunity for all the black residents of the city to have their voices heard. The incident with the officer quickly became a media sensation. Soon, both local and national news outlets began circulating the video of Carter and the officer. Social media exploded with discussions. The video of the police officer slashing the mayor's tires went viral. People from all over the city began to rally behind Carter. The anger and outrage of the growing number of people were palpable. What had started as a personal conflict quickly turned into a public movement. Carter saw how his actions were beginning to change public opinion. More and more people were standing by him. Journalists began writing articles, and the public started to realize the issue he had raised. But the most important change was happening within him. He understood that this fight was not just about personal revenge. It was about justice and equality, and in that moment, he felt his role as a leader, someone who couldn't back down. Soon, it was clear. The officer was identified, and an official investigation was launched. Under public pressure, local authorities were forced to take action. This led to the officer's firing. Carter felt that his efforts hadn't been in vain, but this was just the beginning. Carter wasn't going to stop here. He used the incident as leverage in his fight against racism in the city's police force. The mayor's office announced plans for police reforms, including new training for officers to ensure that such incidents would not happen again. When Carter stood before the cameras at the press conference, his eyes radiated determination. He knew this was his moment, the moment when he could change the system and help everyone who faced racism every day. Instead of being torn by doubt or fear, he stood confidently, proudly, like a man who hadn't just won, but had become a symbol of change. "This isn't just about this one incident," he said. "This is about ensuring every citizen in this city can feel safe, that each of us can fight for justice." All of this was captured on camera, and Carter's words became a rallying cry for those suffering from systemic injustice. When the officer was fired, he was forced to apologize publicly. This marked the beginning of change. But this wasn't just about punishing one officer. It was a lesson to the entire system, a reminder that no one could ignore the truth once it became public. Carter realized that justice was achievable, but only if people refused to stay silent. This moment became the starting point in the fight against racism and prejudice.